June 4th, 1943, Camp Hearne, Texas. Unteroffizier Wilhelm Hoffman's spoon shook as he stared at the meal in front of him. Beef stew with real chunks of meat, fresh vegetables that weren't half rotten, white bread made from actual wheat, and a glass of cold milk that practically glowed in the afternoon sun. He thought, this can't be real. Later, he wrote home to his mother in bombed-out Hamburg, they're showing us propaganda food. Tomorrow, they'll give us turnip water like everyone else. Around him, 1,850 other German POWs from the defeated Afrika Korps sat in stunned silence inside a mess hall thrown up in just 90 days. These men had survived for months on 200 grams of bread, stuffed with sawdust and thin soup, scraped together from animal fodder. Now, they faced portions big enough to feed a whole Wehrmacht squad for 3 days. Forks hovered midair. A few men cried. Others couldn't even move, frozen by the sheer abundance after 3 years of Nazi propaganda about starving, crumbling America. What they didn't realize was that this was just everyday life in America, a country churning out more food than it could eat, even while feeding 12 million soldiers and sending 17 million tons of food to its allies. That first meal kicked off a transformation, one that would shatter everything these men believed about American weakness, German superiority, and the inevitable victory of the Third Reich. To really grasp what these soldiers felt, you have to understand what they came from. By 1943, the German ration system had become a complex maze of hunger. Civilians got 1,700 calories a day if they were lucky. Soldiers in the field were promised 3,600 but never saw half that. North Africa was even worse. Feld Vera Müller, captured with the 21st Panzer Division in Tunisia, kept a diary. His last entry before capture, May 11th, 1943. Division meal today, 150 grams black bread, mostly sawdust, 15 grams margarine, rancid soup with 1 potato, and desert weeds. The Italians have nothing. We're eating our horses. By surrender, the proud Afrika Korps were just shadows of their former selves. Rommel had begged Berlin for supplies, but ships kept getting sunk by Allied planes and submarines. What little arrived spoiled in the heat. By early 1943, German troops in North Africa were suffering from scurvy, beriberi, and protein deficiency, diseases Wehrmacht doctors hadn't seen since the last war. Oberleutnant Friedrich Bauer, a medical officer captured at Kasserine Pass, wrote, "The men's gums bled constantly from scurvy. Night blindness from lack of vitamin A hit 30% of the troops. Swollen legs from protein starvation. We'd become an army of walking skeletons." When Tunisia fell on May 13th, 1943, 275,000 Axis soldiers, many of them the elite who had conquered France and pushed the British back to El Alamein, marched into Allied captivity. They believed absolutely in German superiority and American decadence. Their first shock came at the collection points in North Africa, where American quartermasters handed out C rations and K rations. American soldiers griped about these meals, but to the Germans, they seemed like a miracle. Unteroffizier Karl Schmidt, captured with the 90th Light Division, wrote, "The Americans gave us small boxes they called K rations. Inside was more food than I'd seen in 2 months. Crackers that weren't moldy, a tin of meat that was actually meat, chocolate, sugar, even cigarettes. They apologized this was all they had. Apologized. The next surprise came on the way to America. Liberty ships, pumped out from American shipyards at a rate German officers would have called impossible, usually hauled supplies to Europe. Now they carried prisoners back. In the hastily converted holds, German soldiers saw American abundance up close. Gerhard Hans Weber remembered, "The American sailors threw away more food after each meal than my whole company ate in a week. Whole loaves of bread, barely touched, went into the garbage. Sailors complained about having chicken too much. One crushed a chocolate bar under his heel because it had melted. We fought each other to dig through their garbage." Norfolk, Naval Base, Virginia, August 1943, when the German prisoners stepped off the train, nothing prepared them for what they saw. Dock workers, lots of women, plenty of African Americans too. The very people Nazi propaganda called unfit for skilled work were hauling cargo, chatting, laughing, eating thick meat and cheese sandwiches right on the job. Coca-Cola bottles clinked into bins. Half-finished cigarettes got crushed underfoot every few minutes. It was everyday life, casual and wasteful, in a way the prisoners had forgotten people could live. Then came the processing station. Each prisoner lined up for a medical check, and the surprises just kept coming. American doctors working side by side with captured German medics handed out vitamin supplements. That was almost unimaginable for men who had spent months starving. Major William Patterson, the Army doctor in charge, took one look and realized he was seeing textbook malnutrition. Scurvy, pellagra, beriberi, diseases he'd only read about. The average German prisoner weighed 30 pounds less than normal. The medical team started them on a slow, careful diet to avoid refeeding syndrome. The real shock, though, came during the train ride inland. For 3 days, they rolled through the Shenandoah Valley, watching orchards heavy with apples, cornfields stretching forever, herds of fat cattle. Every little town had a grocery store with stuffed windows, diners with handwritten specials out front, ice cream parlors packed with customers. You could almost taste the abundance through the glass. America would end up holding 425,000 German prisoners in 700 camps across 46 states. At the peak in May 1945, over 370,000 were locked up. Texas alone housed about 50,000 scattered across several camps. The Geneva Convention said the climate for prisoners should match where they'd been captured, so Texas made sense for the Afrika Korps. Camp Hearne, one of the first, went up in just 4 months. It could hold nearly 5,000 men, and the place was something else. Electric lights, hot showers, flush toilets, recreation halls, luxuries for most of these guys even before the war. The mess hall served 3 hot meals a day. The menu for June 5th, 1943 still exists. Oatmeal with milk and sugar, scrambled eggs, bacon, toast with butter and jam, coffee with cream, orange juice for breakfast. Lunch was vegetable soup, roast pork with gravy, mashed potatoes, carrots, bread and butter, apple pie, milk. Dinner, fried chicken, rice, green beans, cornbread, fruit salad, coffee. That was one day, 3,500 calories, more than a German civilian got in 2 days. Just the meat alone was more than a month's ration back home. Herman Reacher, a former factory worker, remembered, "I ate until I was sick. Then I ate more." And we all did. Some men hid bread in their bunks, sure it would all end tomorrow. Guards just laughed and told them there'd be more food the next day and the next. Nobody believed it, but the food kept coming. Nothing broke Nazi propaganda faster than this flood of food. These men had been told America was weak, divided, falling apart. Now here they were, eating better than German officers while the U.S. was fighting on 2 fronts. The camp canteen became a window into American life. For the 80 cents they earned each day, prisoners could buy things that had vanished from Germany: chocolate bars, cigarettes, razor blades, soap, toothpaste, writing paper, ice cream, lots and lots of ice cream. Camp Hearne sold 5,000 ice cream bars a week. Fritz Meller wrote home, "Yesterday I bought ice cream." Ice cream! In Germany, even party officials can't get it. Here, enemy prisoners buy it for 5 cents. The Americans have so much cocoa, they feed it to prisoners. The medical care was just as shocking. Prisoners got vitamin injections, special diets, bottles of pills. The camp hospitals had more supplies than most German field units. Penicillin, impossible to get back home, was given out freely for infections. Dr. Heinrich Schmidt, a captured German medical officer, wrote, "They gave us vitamins in bottles, hundreds of pills like candy. In Germany, we had nothing for our own wounded. Here, enemy prisoners get better care than German civilians ever dreamed of." By October 1943, labor shortages meant German POWs found themselves working on American farms and in food processing plants. Seeing how Americans grew and produced food finished off whatever belief they'd had in Nazi superiority. At a cotton gin near Houston, prisoners stared in disbelief at a single machine picking what would have taken 50 men to harvest back home. The gin churned out more cotton in a day than German mills managed in a month. But it was the easy abundance that really got to them. Workers, black and white, including African Americans Nazis had been taught to see as subhuman, ate lunches that would have looked like banquets in wartime Germany. Thick beef or ham sandwiches, whole apples, slices of pie, coffee with real cream. They'd toss out half-eaten food without a second thought. Johann Kellner, picking crops near Jackson, Mississippi, wrote, "The Negro workers eat meat every day, white bread, fruit. One threw away a whole apple because of a bruise. In Germany, people would fight over that apple." At a Del Monte plant in California, POWs watched train cars full of peaches poured into machines, canned by technology they'd never seen in Germany. That one plant processed more fruit in a day than Germany imported in a year. Workers drank orange juice like water. Fruit, with the slightest flaw, was dumped by the ton. Food that would have been hoarded in Germany. Nothing shocked the Germans more than America's meat consumption. Back home, civilians might get 250 grams of meat a week if they were lucky. Soldiers were supposed to get 150 grams a day, but rarely did. In American POW camps, the prisoners had meat 2 or 3 times a day. Not horse meat, not mystery tins labeled meat, but actual beef, pork, and chicken. At Camp Shelby in Mississippi, 5,300 Germans went through 14,000 pounds of meat a week. The butchers cut steaks, ground burgers, roasted slabs of beef, almost carelessly to men whose families had starved. Paul Fisher, an Oberreiter, put it simply, "Today for Sunday dinner we had roast beef, a slab as thick as my thumb." The Americans complained it was tough. In Germany, this would be wedding feast meat. "My children have never seen such meat." At Swift and Company's packing plant in Fort Worth, POWs saw the full scale of American meat production. The plant turned 5,000 cattle into steak and roasts every day. Workers took home beef that would have cost a German laborer a month's pay. The waste was staggering. Kurt Zimmerman wrote, "They threw out meat for having too much fat. Fat we would have treasured in Germany." One plant made more meat in a week than all of Bavaria saw in a year. Before capture, German POWs lived on preserved vegetables, sauerkraut, pickled beets, dried beans. Fresh fruit was just a memory, something only Nazi officials could get. In America, fresh produce rolled into camp every day. Oranges for breakfast, tropical fruit in Texas in June for enemy prisoners. Apples, peaches, pears, grapes, bananas, fruit most Germans hadn't seen in years. Wilhelm Becker wrote, "They gave us oranges at breakfast, not for special occasions, every day, if we wanted. The vitamin C cured my bleeding gums in a week." We ate more fruit as prisoners than German children see in a year. The vegetable selection seemed endless. Lettuce, tomatoes, corn, beans, peas, carrots, potatoes, onions, cabbage, squash, all fresh. At Camp Hearne, the POWs tended a 50-acre vegetable garden themselves and marveled at the yield. Working on American farms, German prisoners ran headlong into a kind of plenty they'd never imagined. In California's Central Valley, they picked fruit in orchards that stretched on forever, watching in disbelief as perfect fruit was dumped for a blemish or destroyed just to keep prices up. Chocolate had vanished from Germany by 1941, replaced by ersatz bars made from acorns and beet sugar. Real chocolate was rarer than gold, sugar strictly rationed. But in American POW camps, chocolate and candy bars were everyday treats. The camp store sold Hershey bars, Baby Ruths, Snickers, Milky Ways, names that would stick in the memories of returning POWs for the rest of their lives. Suddenly, luxury foods were just there every day. Kurt Wagner wrote, "I bought 5 chocolate bars with one day's pay." In Germany, all the money in the world wouldn't buy a real chocolate bar. What kind of wealth lets your enemies eat chocolate every day? Camp kitchens churned out them pies, cakes, cookies, puddings, dessert every day. Sugar was everywhere, piled into coffee, sprinkled over cereal, packed into desserts. For prisoners who'd gone years without sweets, the first taste hit hard. Some even made themselves sick, gorging on candies and cakes. Then came the dairy, milk, butter, cheese, cream, foods that had pretty much vanished from German life. Suddenly, in the American POW camps, there was fresh milk at every meal, butter for bread, cheese sandwiches, even ice cream. All that calcium and protein started to heal bodies worn down by years of deprivation. Back in Germany, milk was for babies or pregnant women, if you could get it. Butter was a black market prize. Cheese was just something people talked about, not something anyone actually ate. At Camp Hearne, the dairy showed up every day with 500 gallons of milk. Men who hadn't had a real glass in years drank it like it was medicine. One prisoner, Antesia Franz Weber, wrote, "I drank a full glass of cold milk today. Real milk, not powdered, not condensed. It tasted like peace, like childhood, like everything we had lost." Coffee in Germany by 1943 was a sad joke. Roasted barley, acorns, chicory, bitter stuff that only reminded you of what you didn't have. In the American camps, real coffee was everywhere. The smell in the morning, the way they refilled your cup at every meal, the real cream and sugar. It was a kind of comfort you couldn't measure. For Germans, coffee meant more than a drink. It was social life, a piece of home. These simple luxuries tore holes in Nazi propaganda. As headman Friedrich Timman wrote, "The Americans drink coffee all day long. Real coffee from Brazil with cream and sugar. In Germany, my mother stretches 50 grams of oats. Coffee, a staple of German life, was now a lesson in American plenty. Bread was another shock. By 1943, German bread was dark, dense, mixed with potato flour and sawdust, rationed out in sad, moldy chunks. In the camps, though, fresh white bread landed on the table at every meal. At Camp Shelby, the bakery turned out 10,000 loaves a week, soft wheat bread the Germans had only heard about, and you could eat as much as you wanted. Greiter Paul Schmidt wrote, "White bread, soft as cake, fresh every day. We can take as many slices as we want. In Germany, people are killed for stealing bread." When prisoners finally got to write home, their letters told stories the censors couldn't hide. How could they explain to families scraping by on turnip soup that, as POWs, they were eating meat 3 times a day? Some lied, not wanting to add to their family's misery. Others sent every penny home to help buy food on the black market, knowing their wages could buy what ration cards never would. In one intercepted letter, Unterpeter Karl Hoffmann wrote to his wife, "My beloved Greta, I am well fed here. Do not worry about me. The Americans have more food than they know what to do with. I understand now why they fight. They are protecting paradise." Still, abundance wasn't the only surprise. American camps bent over backwards for prisoners with special dietary needs. Diabetics got sugar-free meals, men with ulcers received bland food, and the kitchen even tried to serve up familiar tastes. Rye bread, sauerkraut, German favorites. This care went way beyond what German hospitals did for their own wounded. Dr. Wilhelm Braun, the senior German medical officer at Camp Shelby, put it bluntly, "The Americans spend more effort accommodating the dietary needs of enemy prisoners than the Wehrmacht spends feeding its own soldiers." As more prisoners worked on American farms, they saw a different world. They learned about crop rotation, chemical fertilizers, big machines, irrigation, methods that left German farming in the dust. Hermann Weber, working on a Kansas wheat farm, was floored. One American farmer with machines could farm 640 acres, land that would have needed a whole German village. The combine alone could harvest 100 acres of wheat a day. He did it with machines, chemicals, and scientific methods we had never seen, Weber wrote. The American farmer he worked for grew more food than Weber's whole district back in Bavaria. Then came Thanksgiving, November 25th, 1943. The holiday meant nothing to the prisoners, but the meal said everything: roast turkey with stuffing, mashed potatoes and gravy, sweet potatoes with marshmallows, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, rolls with butter, pumpkin pie, apple pie, plus endless coffee and milk, even if they didn't know the story behind it. The message was clear. This was abundance on a scale they hadn't seen before. Every prisoner got enough food to feed a German family for a week. Just the turkey alone was more than a German family got in meat for a whole month. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann wrote, "The Americans celebrated a holiday by feeding enemy prisoners like nobility. If every American family was eating like this, America isn't a country, it's paradise." The prisoners who worked in the canning factories saw food preservation on a scale Germany couldn't even dream of. At the Campbell Soup Factory in Camden, New Jersey, they watched 10 million cans of soup roll out every year. The lines never stopped. Cans filled with beef and vegetables that German factories couldn't even get hold of. The technology blew their minds. Automated peelers, cookers that never shut off, vacuum sealers. But what really got them was the quality control. If a can had even a small dent, out it went. The amount they threw away just for being a little off would have fed Germany for months. Officer Fritz Müller wrote, "They rejected whole pallets of cans because the labels were a bit crooked. Perfect food, straight in the trash. It's unimaginable." Then there was ice cream. For the Germans, ice cream had been a rare treat before the war. During the war, it just didn't exist. In the American POW camps, it was ordinary. Camp Shelby had a machine that churned out 50 gallons a day in the summer. Prisoners bought ice cream bars, cones, cups at the canteen. The fact that they, the enemy, could eat ice cream while German kids had never even tried it was hard to handle. Überwriter Hans Meer wrote, "I ate chocolate ice cream today. In Germany, even the rich couldn't imagine this. Here, prisoners buy it with pocket change." American doctors kept careful records of how the prisoners' health changed. In 3 months, the average prisoner gained 25 to 30 pounds. Scurvy vanished. Night blindness cleared up. Protein edema faded away. Major Robert Harrison, the Camp Shelby chief medical officer, reported, "The Germans arrived looking like concentration camp victims, skinny, sick, mentally worn down from hunger. 3 months of decent food, and they looked like healthy young men again. Even the prisoners hardly recognized themselves, and Their muscles came back. They felt stronger. The fog of hunger in their minds finally lifted. Suddenly, they saw themselves in the mirror as they'd been before the war. But as their strength returned, so did guilt. Their families were starving back home. How could they eat 3 meals a day while their own kids went hungry? The awful truth was that their enemies fed them better than their own country ever did. Most couldn't admit this to anyone. After the war, people found Paul Fisher's unsent letter to his wife. "My dear wife, I can't tell you the truth. I eat meat every day while you starve. I am safe while you are bombed. The Americans treat me better than our own government treats you." Christmas 1943 just made it worse. American churches, the Red Cross, and civic groups sent 500,000 Christmas packages to German POWs, chocolate, cookies, canned food, cigarettes, toiletries. Locals added homemade scarves, hand-drawn cards, cookies from church ladies. They handed them out to everyone, no matter their rank or politics. This generosity from people whose families were fighting and dying in Europe shattered what was left of Nazi racial theory. Headman Vera Klein wrote, "American civilians whose sons we tried to kill a few months ago sent us Christmas gifts. Churches prayed for us. Children sent cards wishing us a Merry Christmas. Only people who know they're going to win act like this toward their enemies." By early 1944, food in the camps did more than just fill stomachs. It became a kind of school. The prisoners learned about nutrition, vitamins, balanced diets, and food safety. They realized good food didn't just help your body, it lifted your mood and cleared your mind. The camp libraries stocked American agricultural journals and cookbooks. Some prisoners dove in, studying farming methods, food processing, and the science behind it all. They figured out that American abundance was no accident. It came from scientific farming, machines, and smart distribution. Oberreiter Friedrich Becker, who'd studied agriculture, wrote, "The Americans have turned farming into a science. They test their soil, breed better crops, use chemistry to grow more. No wonder they have so much food." As 1944 wore on and news from home got worse, the gulf between the POWs' full plates and Germany's hunger got harder to bear. Letters that slipped past the censors spoke of cities bombed flat, people boiling grass for soup, children dying from hunger. German prisoners of war in America grumbled about eating the same food over and over, but what really shook them was how much the Americans had and wasted. The whole Nazi idea of a master race just fell apart when they saw it. How could they be starving while their so-called inferior enemies tossed food in the trash? Even the black men hauling away their garbage ate better than German officers. Reality crushed their ideology right there. By the summer of 1944, these POWs started working in the fields during America's busiest harvest season, and every day seemed to hammer the point home. They picked peaches in Georgia, hauled vegetables in New Jersey, cut wheat in Kansas. The scale of it all just blew them away. One day, in a Georgia orchard, the prisoners picked enough peaches to feed a German city for a month. Workers sorted perfect fruit for market, sent the slightly bruised ones to canneries, and tossed the rest, sometimes to pigs, sometimes just away. Gerrit Wilhelm Hoffmann wrote, "We fed peaches to pigs today. Thousands of peaches, too ripe for shipping, given to swine." In Germany, people would weep for such fruit. There were moments that hit even harder. At Camp Shelby that July, local farmers dropped off truckloads of watermelons for a 4th of July party. Some Germans had never even seen a watermelon. They didn't grow in Germany. The prisoners got whole melons to share, but many didn't even know how to eat them. Some actually cried at the taste. Pure, sweet water, right there in fruit. Antraizia Carl Schmidt wrote, "They gave us giant green fruits full of sweet red flesh. Each one could feed a family." The Americans ate the centers and threw away the rest. For the Germans, it was clear a country that can waste food for fun has already won. Then there was Iowa. Working in those cornfields, they saw just how much food America could grow. Iowa alone grew more corn than all of Germany's total grain output. And most of it went to animals just to make more meat. In Germany, nobody would dream of using good land to feed livestock. It was a luxury they couldn't afford. But here, prime farmland went straight to animal feed. Feldwebel, Hermann Fischer, wrote, "The farmer explained that corn was mainly for pigs and cattle. They grow food to feed to animals to make meat. The Americans have so much grain they can afford to convert it to meat." At a sugar beet plant in Colorado, Germans watched the kind of sugar production they could barely imagine. Back home, civilians got 200 grams a month if they were lucky. In Colorado, the plant processed 5,000 tons of beets a day, churning out mountains of white sugar. Workers got bags of sugar as part of their pay and dumped it in their coffee, on cereal, in their baking without a second thought. Oberwriter Paul Vber wrote, "I watched a worker pour half a cup of sugar into his coffee. This was 2 months of German sugar rations dissolved into 1 cup of coffee." Down at the Gulf Coast, German POWs watched American fishing boats haul in catches bigger than the entire German fishing industry. Shrimpers tossed tons of edible fish overboard just because they weren't the right kind. At Galveston, prisoners saw more fish thrown away in a day than German fleets caught in a week. Gerrit Hans Müller wrote, "They threw tons of fish back into the sea because they were the wrong kind." In Germany, people would fight over fish heads. Dairy farms in Wisconsin stunned them even more. One farm produced more milk in a day than some German districts managed in a week. American farmers had machines and refrigerated tanks and pasteurization equipment years ahead of anything in Germany, and still, they dumped milk if it wasn't perfectly fresh. They used cream and butter like it was nothing. Unterpizia Fritz Wagner wrote, "The farm where I work produces 1,000 gallons of milk daily. One farm, they pour excess milk on fields as fertilizer." Egg farms in Maryland felt just as unreal. 50,000 chickens pumping out 40,000 eggs a day. Machines collected, washed, and sorted them. Germans back home got 1 egg a week if they were lucky. Here, even the POWs ate eggs for breakfast every day. Trains shipped eggs by the thousands to the cities. Gerreiter Wilhelm Becker wrote, "Each house held more birds than our entire village. They threw away more cracked eggs daily than Germany produces." Thanksgiving 1944 rolled around and the abundance just kept coming, even with America fighting on 2 fronts. For the German prisoners, it was impossible not to feel the difference. The war was as good as lost, and the evidence was right there on the table, in the fields and even in the trash. The meals for German POWs didn't shrink. If anything, they kept growing. Turkey, ham, roast beef, mashed and sweet potatoes, stuffing, gravy, green beans, corn, cranberry sauce, 3 kinds of pie, ice cream, coffee, milk, and even wine. It was a feast. The prisoners just sat there stunned. Back home, Germany was starving. Cities were rubble. Kids ate grass soup. Yet here in America, German prisoners ate better than they ever had. Even before the war, Headman Vera Müller put it bluntly, "The Americans have so much food that they can feed enemies better than we fed ourselves in peacetime. They conquered us with food before their armies arrived." By late 1944, guilt kept many POWs from writing home about the food. They couldn't bear it. Hidden diaries and unsent letters found after the war showed just how much this abundance haunted them. Feldwebel Otto Schmidt wrote in one, "I dreamed I could send you a single American meal. The meat from my lunch could feed you for a week. I am in paradise while you are in hell. As 1945 started and news of Germany's collapse trickled in, everything felt surreal. The prisoners heard about the failure of the Ardennes offensive while they ate New Year's dinner. They read about German cities with no food, heat, or water while sitting in warm, well-lit mess halls. American newspapers ran photos of starving German civilians' children with swollen bellies, families picking through trash. The prisoners recognized their own loved ones in those faces. Hans Fischer wrote, "The newspaper shows German children eating soup made from grass. I had bacon for breakfast. My little Klauser is eating grass while I eat meat." When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, a strange irony set in. Freedom meant the prisoners would have to return to a ruined, starving homeland. Some didn't want to go. The camps had become a refuge from the hunger waiting for them in Germany. The US military tried to help. They set up programs to teach POWs about food production and preservation, canning, farming, nutrition, food distribution, hoping these men could help rebuild Germany. Major General Louis Lurch, who oversaw POW operations, said, "These men have seen American abundance. They know it's possible. They'll return to Germany with knowledge that can help prevent starvation." But as repatriation drew closer in late 1945 and early 1946, the reality hit hard. The prisoners had to prepare to leave plenty behind and face hunger again. Commanders started cutting back rations, trying to help the men adjust. They taught them how to forage, make soup from scraps, preserve food without a fridge. The same camps that had overflowed with food now taught survival in scarcity. Dr. Wilhelm Hoffmann, the senior German medical officer, didn't sugarcoat it. "We must teach our men to starve again. Their stomachs have expanded. Returning to German rations may kill some of them." Before the prisoners left, each camp held a farewell dinner. The Americans pulled out all the stops: shrimp cocktail, prime rib, lobster tail, baked potatoes loaded with butter and sour cream, asparagus, Caesar salad, chocolate cake, ice cream, wine, coffee. At Camp Shelby's dinner in February 1946, grown men wept, not for joy, but because they knew they'd probably never eat like this again. Headman Friedrich Müller wrote, "Our last American meal was finer than any German feast I remember. Tomorrow we return to turnip soup and sawdust bread. America sent us home with full bellies and broken hearts." The trip back to Germany showed just how much had been lost. As the trains rolled in, POWs pressed their faces to the windows, looking out on a wasteland. At every station, civilians, skeletal and desperate, begged for food the prisoners didn't have. In Frankfurt, they watched people fighting over garbage from Allied trains. Starving kids begged for chocolate that didn't exist. Paul Weber wrote, "We returned to hell. My wife thought I was an imposter. I was too healthy, too well fed. My son, born while I was gone, has rickets from malnutrition. The shame is unbearable." Still, despite all the trauma, these former POWs became a lifeline for Germany's recovery. They brought back American know-how, farming techniques, food preservation, nutrition. They knew abundance was possible because they'd seen it with their own eyes. Many became leaders in rebuilding German agriculture. They brought in machines, chemical fertilizers, scientific farming learned in America. They believed in reconstruction because they'd lived in a place where it worked. Hans Müller, once an Oberritter, later served as an agricultural advisor in Bavaria. He summed it up. "We learned in American fields what German schools never taught, that science and democracy create abundance." When the Marshall Plan rolled out in 1947, former German POWs saw the bigger picture more clearly than most. They already knew what American generosity looked like. They'd lived it. These men had spent years in camps, surrounded by so much food that even the waste felt extravagant. So when shipments of wheat, milk, powder, and canned goods started arriving in Germany, it didn't feel new. It felt like déjà vu. Wilhelm Schmidt, once a Feldwebel, put it simply, the Americans feed us again, this time as free men. They send wheat, milk powder, canned goods, the same food we ate as prisoners, and that experience changed them. Studies in the 1950s found that ex-POWs from American camps thought differently than those held by other nations. They trusted democracy more, believed in working together, and kept a soft spot for America. Food had worked its quiet magic. These men had tasted real abundance, and they wanted that for Germany. They saw with their own eyes that prosperity didn't come from conquest or some twisted idea of superiority. It came from good farming and hard work. Dr. Hans Richter looked into this in 1955. He called American camps accidental schools of democracy. Basically, full stomachs taught German POWs what Nazi ideology had tried to hide. Democracy and capitalism could actually deliver the good life, not just promise it. In the decades that followed, many ex-POWs wrote down their memories. They all circled back to food as the thing that stuck with them most. Vera Hoffman, for example, said, "The Americans defeated us with food before their armies arrived. Every meal was a lesson in their power. We surrendered to abundance long before we surrendered to Eisenhower." Kurt Mahler wrote, "I learned more about America from its food than from its books. The casual waste taught me about surplus. The variety taught me about choice." By the 1980s, some of these men were coming back to the US for reunions, visiting the old camps, now just regular places, and meeting up with former guards and locals who still remembered them. At a 1985 reunion at Camp Shelby, Hans Weber brought German beer and toasted his old captors. "You fed us when we were enemies. You showed us abundance when we knew only scarcity. We returned to Germany with full bellies and new dreams." Robert Johnson, an American guard, replied, "We just fed you what we ate ourselves. Nothing special. That's what America is. Nothing special that seems miraculous. To those who've known want, the numbers say it all. German civilians during the war scraped by on rations: bread, 2,000 grams a week; meat, if you were lucky, 250 grams; fats, 100 grams; sugar, 200 grams a month; milk, none for adults; eggs, maybe one a week; daily calories, somewhere between 1,200 and 1,700. In American POW camps, bread was unlimited, meat 350 grams a day, butter every day, sugar flowed in coffee and desserts, milk a whole quart daily, eggs at breakfast every morning. That's 3,500 to 4,000 calories per day, and it wasn't just the amount. The quality was worlds apart. German food meant ersatz substitutes, moldy supplies, and even sawdust fillers. American rations were fresh, varied, better than what most Germans had eaten before the war. Psychologists later found that this daily experience of plenty changed how former POWs thought. Every meal forced them to reconsider what they'd believed about America, about Germany, about what made a country strong. Dr. Friedrich Braun summed it up in 1950. The POWs underwent involuntary ideological conversion through ingestion. Every meal contradicted Nazi propaganda. The men were not brainwashed, but belly-washed, converted through consumption rather than coercion. What made the difference was experience, not theory. These men didn't read about American abundance, they ate it. They didn't just hear about agricultural strength, they helped with the harvest. When they went home, they brought a bit of America with them, recipes from mess halls, cooking tricks from farm wives, and a new idea that abundance was possible. The first German supermarkets in the 1950s copied the American stores that POWs described. Endless aisles, cold cases, frozen foods. These ideas came straight from captivity. Even the success of American fast food in Germany had roots in those camp meals, as former POWs remembered hamburgers, hot dogs, and ice cream. They'd tasted what casual abundance felt like, and they wanted that for Germany too. Back in 1995, at the big reunion marking 50 years since the end of the war, 89-year-old Otto Müller took the stage. He didn't hold back. "We came to America as warriors," he said, "believing we were the master race, sure we'd win, but that idea shattered fast. They left America changed men, and it wasn't the guns or the guards that did it. It was the food. The Americans didn't feed the German POWs out of spite, teasing them with what they couldn't have. No, they shared what they had generously, almost casually, as if abundance were the most natural thing in the world. Every meal felt like a lesson. A full stomach taught more than any lecture. Mueller realized America's real power wasn't its weapons. It was its wheat, not its ideology, but its ice cream. Yeah, ice cream, something American prisoners ate every day while German kids back home starved. These men went back to Germany with a knowledge no spy could have smuggled out. They knew deep in their bones that abundance was real because they tasted it. They understood democracy worked because they'd felt it in their bellies. And they knew peace beat war because they'd lived both. "You conquered us with kindness," Muller told his hosts. "Defeated us with donuts. Converted us with coffee and cream." They had arrived as enemies but left as ambassadors. The food they ate as prisoners laid the groundwork for friendship as allies. He thanked the Americans for feeding them when they were hungry, for mercy when they probably deserved punishment, for proving that real strength lies in giving, not taking. "We ate democracy," he said, "and it changed us." The crowd, Americans, Germans, their families, stood up together, remembering a time when food did what guns couldn't, turned enemies into friends, hatred into hospitality, and brought peace not with vengeance, but with vitamins. Think about it. Few moments in history show the power of a generosity like this. Without any grand plan, America won hearts simply by feeding its prisoners well. Nearly 500,000 German POWs passed through those camps. They came as Nazis, left as witnesses to a different kind of greatness. They believed in German superiority, but went home knowing what American prosperity tasted like. Food in those camps didn't just keep them alive, it changed the way they saw the world. Every generous portion chipped away at Nazi beliefs. Every dessert shattered propaganda. Every glass of milk crushed the myth that Americans were weak. In the end, America's real weapons weren't bombs or tanks. They were apple pie, chocolate bars, beef steak. The Germans expected to find a broken country, but instead they saw a nation so rich it could feed its enemies better than Germany fed its own people. This experience stuck. The transformation wasn't temporary. These men went back to Germany not as beaten enemies, but as converts, advocates for abundance, people who'd seen what was possible. They had tasted the future, and it was good. Their story still matters. Some of the greatest victories don't happen on the battlefield, but in mess halls. Not by breaking bodies, but by filling bellies. The German POWs, amazed to eat meat, fruit, and chocolate in captivity, learned that democracy's real strength is in creating, not destroying, in providing, not punishing. They arrived hungry and left full, not just with food, but with new ideas for their own country. Out of that transformation grew the roots of the Atlantic Alliance, the Marshall Plan, and a peaceful, thriving Germany. The men who once marched for the Third Reich returned home as advocates for agriculture, prosperity, and the simple world-changing idea that sharing abundance can turn enemies into friends. They tasted America, and it changed them forever.